before we jump into some of the questions?
There's two things that aren't on our question list that I want to hit first and foremost once George confirms that audio is good. And to give you a second to think about that while George responds in the chat, we need to talk about Qtrade.
Yeah.
And we need to talk about this cool new feature of our Discord.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So I'll let you choose which one you want to talk about first. They're both pretty cool things that have both happened since our last AMA.
Yeah. So our last AMA was about 6 weeks ago, which was at the 1 year anniversary. Since then, we have just been, as of the last 24 hours, listed on Qtrade.io. If you don't know, Qtrade's a pretty solid exchange. They're an up-and-coming US-based exchange that's seeing a lot of traction, rapidly growing. And their primary claim to fame is that they list original development coins, primarily. That's their main driving force, which means that the number of coins they list is relatively small compared to some exchanges, and also pretty exclusive. So it's a big deal for us that they chose to list Mochimo. They are our third exchange behind VinX and Cytex, which launched back in, I think, late February or early March. And they have just completed their first batch of deposits, I think maybe 4 or 5 hours ago, and all of that's looking pretty good. So the market's up and running on Qtrade. And incidentally, that's one of the reasons why we're doing this AMA, because we wanted to kind of celebrate this listing. It's always a positive for a project when an exchange chooses to list the currency, but it's especially so given that this listing was prompted by the community, meaning that the community got together and they upvoted a listing poll on Qtrade.io's website, and then subsequent to that, teamed up to collect donations to actually cover the listing fee, which was nominal, but still, I think, required 2,500 Mochimo to be collected, courtesy of Backup Kami. So thanks for that, Backup Kami. Thanks to Eric and the Qtrade.io team for listing us. Super happy to have that sign of progress to share with the community. So that's the Qtrade.io thing. Now, Terry alluded to one other thing. So what's going on, Chris? Oh, Chris is talking in the.
Yeah, so they're getting a little. We apologize. It sounds like some of the folks are getting a little popping, not on the microphone, but on the network. So.
Well, that's on Discord.
Yeah, that's on Discord. So there's not much we can do about that, guys. Sorry.
Okay. Chris says it's bearable.
Good.
So the other topic that Terry just brought up, which is the new feature of our Discord channel. So we had a user or community member submitted an idea to have a tip bot less than a week ago, and we just jumped all over it. So we produced a tip bot on the Discord channel, and it works like this. Essentially, if you have earned rank on our channel, on our Discord channel, which means you've gotten a level 5 or sent something like 60 or 70 messages, you gain something called Mochi Bro rank, which progresses at level 10 to Mochi Pro and level 25 to Mochi God. And then at 50, you attain the rank of Almost Trig, which is a rank that you can earn that gives you full moderator privileges just for contributing to the channel. So we're one of the few projects you'll see where you can actually earn full mod privileges on our Discord channel. That's by design. It's designed to make the system egalitarian. So we have this ranking system for that purpose, but we also have it now because it allows people to each month receive a small pool of Mochimo that they can tip to other users. The idea being that this encourages community engagement and involvement. It allows people at no cost to themselves to tip some coins from the bounty pool that will then be paid out by myself and the team. So if you have, for example, Mochi Bro status, every month we'll re-up you with 5 Mochimo that you can tip to whomever you please. And then Mochi Pro is 10, Mochi God is 25, and so on. And you can give those to whomever you please, and at any moment you can claim any tips that have been given to you, and it will drop a notification into our Open Bounties channel, just like a normal bounty, and then you go through the typical process to collect that. So everybody seems to really love this bot. It was coded in-house from scratch by one of our users, Decrypt. So Decrypt did all of the coding And then the original user that recommended it wanted to make a shout out as well. That was Gecko. So
Nice.
these are community inspired and community created tools that promote community involvement. So very happy to have these tools. Very happy to pay for all of those tips. Please spend them and inter-support the community, because I think it's a fantastic program.
Yeah, this really is something that sets us apart from a lot of other projects, in that we, at the very beginning, set aside a pool of coins, which are technically your property, but we steward those only for the purpose of benefiting the network, for things like this, for encouraging growth and adoption, and basically just providing a resource for folks to do things and reward people who are doing good things on the network. This community is everybody's, and everybody's encouraged to get involved with the Mochimo project and contribute in any way they can. And this is a way that others on the network can see the good things that you're doing and reward you in some fashion. So that's a pretty unique thing, and it's pretty cool. I'm excited about using it.
Yep, we are now literally allowing the community to spend the bounty coins themselves.
Yeah,
which is pretty fantastic. That's actually a good segue to the first AMA question. So why don't we jump right into that? If you want to read that out for us.
Yeah. So what are the next steps for moving the Mochimo into the public eye? That's the first question.
All right. So Terry just said it, right? And that is that Mochimo is owned by the community. And it's critically important that as a community, we acknowledge, accept, and embrace that reality, that this project exists because the community wants it to exist. It thrives if the community wants it to thrive. If you want us to be on an exchange, then do some of the legwork to get us on an exchange. If you want us to be featured on a podcast, reach out to that podcast. And if you want me to do that interview, I'll happily do it. But it's a community effort at this point. So moving Mochimo into the public eye requires only that the community engage. And I can guarantee you, anything that you come up with that you want me to do to be a part of that, you've got my time and attention, and we'll make it happen. But it's critically important that people recognize that when it comes to third-party pools, third-party payment processors, exchange listings, all of the things that allow Mochimo to be integrated into payment systems or other systems, those things originate with the community. And one of the things that I think it's important to mention here is we have on this Discord channel this role called core contributor. And where most projects have something called a dev team, which are people who basically assert that they are stewarding the code and that they own it and they're the ones developing it, we have this core contributor rank, which is populated by core contributors nominating community members that are already contributing. And so that process also sets the project apart. We're different from other centralized type systems in that we have a decentralized approach even to the core role, if you will. And that is to say, if you contribute to the project and somebody sees that contribution and they're on the core contributor team, what they do is they say, hey guys, I think we should add this person to the core team. And if nobody objects, that's what happens.
Right.
And it's interesting because we extend that further to this whole bounty system, which is to say people are essentially spending the coins that I own, but are there for the benefit of Mochimo. And because they have the core contributor rank, they have full authority to do that. They literally, for whatever reason that they think is beneficial to the community, they can issue bounties. Now, keep in mind that those people are community members themselves.
Exactly. I kind of I've used this analogy before with folks in that the project is kind of like a boat, and the boat doesn't necessarily have or need a rudder. There is no central person steering the boat. What we have is a boat that has people that are rowing, and we have some folks that have been in the boat from the very beginning, and they're strong rowers. And in the last year, we've added a lot more people to the boat, and they're all rowing. And we have some very strong rowers, like Chris Diggity, Ortis, who were instrumental with our last rollout of the Peach algorithm. Of course, Matt and others, Trig. We've got some very strong rowers, and we've got other folks that row, but maybe not quite as strong. But at the end of the day, we're all just in the same boat, rowing the same project.
Yeah.
There is no single person steering this. It's a collective effort. And so this function that we've built in allows folks to recognize the efforts of some of those people that just got on the boat for the first time and maybe just started rowing, and recognize those other folks that have maybe been rowing a long time. But this is a community effort and a community project. So when you ask, what are the next steps in the public eye, I have to put that back on you. Like, what do you think we should be doing?
Yeah.
Like, answer that question. Like, if you could, yeah, we need you to tell us where you think this boat needs to go, because the only way it gets there without a rudder is that we're all sort of rowing, at least in some quasi coordinated fashion, to get the next 10 feet. And then we may change direction after that. But at the end of the day, it's a community effort.
And I will say this, just because, I want to make sure that people understand, we have plenty of suggestions, and we have people who are actively doing work to gain Mochimo some public exposure. I know that we have people that are on social media every day of their own volition are out there promoting Mochimo. I know that we have people that are actively romancing different exchanges, and these are just community members, just like anybody else, that are trying to make things happen for us. And then when they need information or engagement from me or somebody else on the core contributor team, we're giving that to them. So when we say that we need you to help us pick the direction, that's already actually happening on a daily basis, but it's something that needs to be happening in an ongoing sort of feedback loop.
All right. Well, cool. Well, I'd like to move on to the next question. This question is really more about quantum computing. There's been a lot of stuff in the news about quantum computing, and it's essentially what is the threat that quantum computers pose to other cryptos, and why aren't they adjusting now? Can they just adjust or fork? And we've had this discussion. I know you and I have had this discussion with many folks about, how easy is it to take a Bitcoin or one of these other legacy projects and just flip the direction of that boat and try to make it quantum resistant. So what do you think the real risk is to quantum computers, and how do you think these other projects can respond, or why they haven't responded? How do you feel about that?
Well, let's talk about the first question, which is, what is the threat that quantum computers pose to other cryptos? When we look at cryptocurrencies that are secured, and when we say secured, we mean that the addresses that the coins are secured in, and they're secured by a digital signature algorithm that is itself secured by the discrete logarithm problem. Like, for example, ECDSA is one such algorithm. Those currencies are exposed to quantum computer attacks using Shor's algorithm if the associated key pairs have a public key which has been exposed at least one time. That's the attack surface of the initial wave of quantum computers that will be attempting to break things like ECDSA. In other words, if we don't know what the public key is, it becomes immeasurably harder to crack it. Certainly is still easier to crack with a quantum computer, but the exposure is for forks of Bitcoin and Ethereum much higher, because they have a much greater percentage of addresses with balances that have had their public key exposed at least once. It's very strong for Bitcoin because we have multiple individual addresses on the Bitcoin blockchain that have their public keys exposed, that have $1 billion+ in one account. You can look at every one of Binance's wallets, and they've all spent at least one time, which means that they are exposed to a quantum computing attack to break ECDSA. So the primary exposure is that the public key pair can be factored by a quantum computer using Shor's algorithm into a private key that can then be used to create a signature to sign those coins away to somebody else. That's the exposure. Why are they not adjusting now, was the second question. So there is a threat, but it feels nebulous to people because the advance of quantum computers is slow, and it's not easy to predict what's going to happen next with that technology. It's just like the original arms race for silicon. You don't know when we're going to get to that next generation. But what we do know is, for those of us that have been tracking this, it goes faster the faster it goes, which is a funny way of saying that we have this spiral improvement to quantum computing, both in number of qubits and in error correction, and new materials are being announced each day that make these things better and faster and more effective. And it's not just the number of qubits involved, but the efficacy of the machine and how many operations it can perform without breaking. There's another problem that has to do with the environment required for quantum computers. So a lot of people look at all of these things and they say, well, it's years off. Oh, it's decades off. But we happen to be fairly well positioned with knowledge about the progress of quantum computing, just because one of our advisors actually owns a company that produces quantum computers, particularly quantum computing ASICs, which are the sort of thing that will be used to break ECDSA, RSA, and things like that. And so that person kind of gives us an inside scoop on the future of quantum computing, and the future is sooner than people think. All right, and that's the answer to the question. The question is, why aren't they adjusting now? It's because the future is sooner than they think. They think this is a problem for 15 years from now or 20 years from now. I think I saw somewhere somebody was like, 2045.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, we're going to start to see serious impact to ECDSA-based systems in about 5 years or less, maybe 4 years. So that's why they're not adjusting now.
It's going to happen faster than they think. I think it was a couple of months ago I posted something on the Quantum News channel, and there's a person by the name of Hartmut Nevin who's now being quoted in all the business magazines about coining Nevin's law. And Nevin's law stems from this idea that at Google they're working on quantum computing, and back this December they were running some algorithms on a quantum machine, and they were then running those same numbers on a laptop, a very nice high-powered laptop, and doing some comparisons on speed. And then by January, I believe it was, that they made some improvements based on the hardware and the coding, and they were able to, of course, solve this algorithm on their same quantum device. But then they had to upgrade to a workstation level device, and by February, they did some calculations to figure out how much the horsepower they would need, and it was essentially more than Google had at its global disposal in terms of computing process. So what they're finding is that they are getting to a point where they've got double exponential growth, which isn't something you see in nature. It's a very abnormal thing. So it's going to happen so much faster than everyone expects. That's there's a lot of cryptocurrencies, and I think a lot of security, which kind of leads to one of the other questions, that I think is going to get caught. They're going to get caught with their shorts down when the tide goes out, as they say.
So let me answer the last question, and then we should jump into the other QC related question. The last question in the series: what was the threat? Why aren't they adjusting?
Mm-hmm.
They're underestimating it. And can they just adjust or fork? The short answer is all of the cryptocurrencies that have a lot at stake, these cabals of people that have a stake in those currencies, like, for example, Bitcoin. What we saw with Bitcoin when they attempted to fork to fix a relatively small problem, which was a problem of scale related to the number of transactions per block, was a level of contention that resulted in the splitting of the currency multiple ways. I mean, that's how we got the Bitcoin Cash and its derivative forks. People could not agree. And the reason why they can't agree is because a fork represents an opportunity for the people executing it to impose their will on the network, which is a moment of complete failure of decentralization. It is, by definition, some central authority saying, this is how we're going to do it. Everybody fall in line, and we're backing it with all of our mining power. Thus far, the systems that have a lot of value and a lot of players have not demonstrated the ability to execute those things cleanly. That's why we have, Ethereum Classic. That's why we have Bitcoin Cash and Gold and 15 other Bitcoin clones. because people cannot agree. And that is for relatively unimportant changes, things that aren't causing a existential threat to the currency like quantum computing. When the time comes, I don't believe they can just adjust or fork. I believe that they will try, that you will have multiple cabals of people forming around what is the new Bitcoin and how are we going to address this problem. Some people will want it one way, some people will want it the other, and universally, people will want it in the way that they think is most advantageous to them.
Yeah.
And that's why you're going to have all of this fracturing. That's what I predict. It's not going to happen easily, and when it does happen, it won't happen cleanly, and it's going to shake the confidence of those systems and probably erode or destroy any value that's left in them. So that's kind of the vision that we saw for the future of Bitcoin and Ethereum and these other ECDSA-based coins. And one of the reasons why we set out on the process of creating a post-quantum secure cryptocurrency in the first place is because we recognize that that's not a thing that can happen easily.
Nice. So along those same lines, there's another question we had, which was how might websites like password managers respond to quantum computers? And how is that risk different than cryptocurrency? So what are your thoughts on that, Matt?
There are a lot of systems that depend on symmetric keys and that are based on systems like ECDSA, and they are going to have to move into one-time use type signatures across the board. They're going to have to do basically what we've already done, which is choose something that has been certified by PQ Crypto or NIST or one of these other cryptographic regulatory bodies and change what they're doing. So SSL, for example, that system will break. The encryption that secures your debit cards and bank accounts and things like that, using that stuff online, all of that stuff's going to have to change to probably something like what we're using, which is a Watts Plus or XMSS derivative, ECDSA, superior or post-quantum secure algorithm.
Yeah, so there's definitely, in the digital ledger technology community, there's definitely a lot of discussion about digital ledger-based identities, managing people's identities and passwords and health records and all number of things. And of course, you've got organizations like Facebook offering to be the single source of truth for who you are. So there's definitely an understanding, I think, in the broader community that those are going to be issues as well. And I do think that they need to be solved. And there's some potential for some of the pieces of our technology to be repurposed in that way. But it's kind of outside of the scope of Mochimo. But it's definitely an interesting problem.
And we have a random question here on the live stream questions, and I did say you can ask anything you wanted. This question is: when playing the little blind, how much do you change your strategy in an early game if everyone folds? How much do you bluff, or do you normally play the cards? So, all right. So the answer to this question is: if you're in the small blind and the table folds around to you, the correct thing to do in the early game is just to fold off that half blind and not chase a heads up position against the big blind, because in poker parlance, you're starting out of position. So that's just my 2 cents. It changes if you're in a tournament in the late game, because then you treat it as a heads up hand. But thank you for that completely non sequitur question.
I love it. That's great. That's great.
What else have we got?
Let's see here. We have some folks that are interested in the centralization and mining power. We rolled out a new algo that gets rid of FPGAs, but there's this discussion about pools. So the question is the centralization of mining power in a tiny number of pools a threat to a network? If so, what would you do to avoid it?
In the general, centralization of mining power into a small number of pools is a threat to a cryptocurrency network. The pools that Mochimo has currently, because the code is exposed and we can see how they behave, at present we're not concerned about that particular threat because there is no centralized administrative domain dictating the shape of the ledger. They are simply workers that are running our code to solve blocks. Where it becomes an issue is when you have a large conglomerate of hashing power where they are creating their own custom miners and they are trying to influence the ledger through 51% attacks or chain jacking type behaviors. So there is an exposure, and the exposure exists in part because we don't have a lot of pools just yet. We are not at present concerned about that exposure because we understand how these pools are operating. And furthermore, I want to say that we are also deploying an additional pool on top of what already exists, which is in-house code developed by core contributors and others, currently being tested. And the purpose of that code is to allow an additional competitive pool on the market, but also for us to be able to release code to the rest of the world.
Yeah. So I just reached out to see if the people that are participating in that pool development wanted to speak, but they declined.
I see that. Do you want to talk about the pool? Not really.
No, I'm good.
It's fine. Bottom line, guys, there's pool software that we're developing. It so happens that the pools that exist, I know of 2 private third-party pools and 1 public third-party pool. They are operating. Anybody can join them. The code is not in any way manipulative of our ledger or of the code base. They do represent a very significant portion of our hashing power on the network. We are taking steps to remediate that by publishing our own pool and thereafter providing the code and mechanisms for creating pools to the public at large to increase the number of pool operators out there.
Nice.
So we're doing what we can to mediate that. But the reality is, it's still a relatively young network, being just a little bit over a year old. So it's going to take us time to fully develop into a Bitcoin-sized system with hundreds of mining pools. It's just
where we're at.
Yeah, it's just where we're at. So was there a second question? Sorry, was there an add-on question to that? If so, what will you do to avoid it? Yes, we have, I think, answered that question.
Yeah. So we have another question. What are the major development plans for 2019 and beyond? Which kind of gets back to what we were talking about earlier, that we're all rowing in the same boat. But I guess rather than say what are our plans, like we're Dr. Evil or something like that, what do we see happening? Where do we see the focus of the energy of the community taking the project with the remainder of 2019?
I see a lot of buzz around exchange listing right now. Like that's what the community seems to be very focused on. I think they feel like we got the public API published, and that's what a lot of people were waiting on. So now they feel like, hey, this exchange listing thing is a viable reality. If somebody has the API and they're inclined, they can just list us. So I see the community knocking on those doors quite a bit. Certainly I'm being clued into a lot of those conversations where people are saying, hey, Matt, I have questions about this or that, or this exchange wants this piece of information. Can you answer that question? So that seems to be heavy on the community's mind right now. Certainly yesterday we got listed on an exchange based entirely on community initiative.
Yeah.
So I think that's happening. From a development perspective, I know of a number of things in the works right now, both internally to the core development team and externally. Generally speaking, we don't allude to future technologies, but rather what we do is we talk about technologies that we know that we have in hand, that we've already developed and tested in one way, shape, or form. So I can talk a little bit about those. We have, for example, a process whereby we can guarantee instantaneous payments for a third-party payment provider without exposing that payment provider to risk that somebody will double spend coins. So I'll tell you that process, once you understand the logic of it, it's one of those moments where you sort of slap yourself in the forehead and say, why didn't I think of that? Right? It's just, we've come up with a very elegant solution to that. And what it will do is it will allow us to have third-party payment processors that can link into the Mochimo blockchain and that can provide you with instantaneous authorization at the point of sale to use Mochimo to buy things. Nobody else can do that without incurring some amount of risk that people will abuse the system or they will defraud the third-party payment processor by virtue of of double spending coins. So this system allows you to own your coins, but it allows the third-party payment processor to, with assurance, authorize a transaction knowing that they're the only person that can receive those coins. So it's really cool technology. Really looking forward to launching that. We have in the works also a global overlay network that already exists. It's an optional transaction and block update dissemination network, essentially, that we're working on the protocols for that to make it even faster. You can think of like Bitcoin's Lightning Network as something like that. It's unnecessary, but you can do it, and it makes things faster for everyone.
Nice.
So that's in the works. We also have a privacy layer that is also 100% optional. These are things that are real now, so we can talk about them. And let me address real quick, why don't we talk about future developments? Every other project has a roadmap. Are we afraid to talk about what we want to do? Here's our reality, everyone that's listening to this. We live and operate in a very complex regulatory environment. Okay. And one of the things that has caused other projects some major heartache with US regulators is that they are classed as investment vehicles, right? Mochimo is not an investment. Repeat that as many times as you need to until it sinks in. It's not an investment. And so what we don't do is we don't make statements that look like investment advice. We don't make statements that make people believe that there is some core team that's responsible for the future of the project, that, oh, if you buy this coin, it's guaranteed to gain in value because they're working on all these fantastic things. We don't do those things, and we don't talk about future developments because it creates this implication that you can depend on Matt Zweil or somebody else on the core team to make your quote unquote investment more valuable in the future. So we steer entirely away from that. We don't talk about Mochimo as any kind of investment. In fact, we point blank say it's not.
You should make that a ringtone that people can download.
Yeah.
Mochimo is not an investment.
Yeah. that'd be fantastic. But that's the challenge that we're in, is we have to make sure that with every little thing that we do, that we avoid the appearance of that kind of vehicle.
Right.
And so that's why we don't talk about what we're doing in the future, because it's almost as though we're promising you can depend on us as some kind of centralized body to develop this new technology that will potentially make the product more valuable.
Right. And that's not what we're doing. We just, this project from the beginning has been about looking at the cryptocurrency space and figuring out what the lessons could be learned from the past history, and then trying to envision a solution that maybe somebody else wouldn't even think was possible, asking that question and then sort of attacking that with code and seeing if you can actually do the thing that no one would even try.
Yeah, the mid-block difficulty adjustment that we have, the post-quantum secure algorithm, the chain crunch, where you can download our entire blockchain in a matter of a few minutes and be operating a full node with absolute fidelity. These are things that people didn't envision because we didn't learn about the drawbacks of doing it the other way in the first and second generation of currencies. And then when we learned about them, a lot of people thought you couldn't do anything to fix those things in the existing system. And they were right. But what we had the benefit of was the ability to architect something from the ground, from scratch, and build these things in, like our, I think of it first of its kind proof of work chain in the T file that we have with Chain Crunch. It enables so many of the secret sauce things that our currency can do that nobody else's can, or at least couldn't at the point that we launched our currency. So we are innovating technology. That's the thing that we care about. In the process, we are creating a cryptocurrency to serve as a medium of exchange, not a store of value or an investment vehicle. We are creating digital money. So here's the other thing. You can put this into your mantra of Mochimo is not an investment. Mochimo is money. Point blank, period. Since Mochimo is money, it is by definition not an investment vehicle. It is a medium of exchange, and that's what we have built. And we've built it to scale, and that's why we have things like this third-party payment processing system that we've attached recently.
Exactly. And so the things that you've talked about are really just us taking me after having done all these cool things and figuring out, well, having built this platform, what are some of the other things that the world needs? What are the other things that no one thought was possible that we could do, that we could pursue? And then if the community supports those things, we'll develop solutions around those. With their help, we'll develop these new and innovative solutions to even cooler problems. That's what this project's all about. I see some other questions coming in.
Just run one. What do you got?
Do you think the narrative of MCM will change from medium of exchange to store of value, like what happened to Bitcoin? That's an interesting question. So the question, there's, the thing about money is that, if you take an economics class and you don't get kicked out, you'll probably learn that, money, the classic definition of money is that it's a medium of exchange, a unit of account, meaning things are denominated. I buy things in dollars, I buy things in Bitcoin, so I buy things in Mochimo, unit of account, or that it's a store of value. And so, money in a philosophic sense can serve all of those different purposes. But I think the point here is that there's a difference between something being a store of value and something being recognized as an investment vehicle. And I think that that's the distinction that you're trying to make, is that it may, as serving in money, it may represent a store of value, but that doesn't mean it's an investment opportunity.
I think that's fair, because what's happened with Bitcoin is not that people have begun to treat it as a store of value, but rather they have begun to treat it as a hedging asset and an investment.
Yes.
Rather than using it on a day-to-day basis to buy and sell goods and services, they treat it as an appreciating asset or a hedge against changes in the economy or in the geopolitical situation. So what happened to Bitcoin is exactly that. It never could quite scale to being used as money, and it became a de facto store of value, and then subsequent to that became an investment vehicle. Now, I can tell you that I do not have any control over the narrative of MCM or how people view it in the future. I can tell you only what was envisioned and baked into the original design. We have baked into the original design a very high-speed network that can scale in order to meet the demand of a global digital money system. Bitcoin does not have that. And in some ways, one of the reasons why Bitcoin began to fail as a medium of exchange was because they could not scale, because people could not reliably get money in and out of the system to buy things with Bitcoin. Third-party payment processors could not engage to the system without high levels of risk and fraud. And we have addressed those issues of scale, of third-party payment processors. We have addressed the issue of being able to handle extremely large transaction volumes by way of our multi-destination transactions. And to put that into perspective, the system has been tested at 170 TPS on the live network. With the multi-destination transactions that were included as part of the v2.4 update, each one of those transactions can now multiplex 100 destinations at once, which means that we can have an effective throughput of 17,000 transactions per second, right? In other words, 17,000 different people can be paid on the network at once. And we envision a future where payment processors doing high volumes of work will submit full multi-desk transactions. For example, a third-party intermediary like a Visa or what have you would be submitting those large transactions. That's the design of the system. Will that come to fruition? I cannot say. I don't have a crystal ball in that regard. All I know is that we built it so that it could be that thing. One of the things that we're also looking toward is by keeping the mining egalitarian, which is to say mineable via GPU, as opposed to allowing FPGAs and ASICs on the network to have a massive advantage. Instead, we have this GPU optimized currency that I think will defend the decentralization and allow everybody to compete on a relatively even playing field which will have the net effect of not driving the price to the crazy heights in the near term that you see on Bitcoin, right? And I think that has a psychological impact on how people perceive Bitcoin because it is so expensive, and you have this whole coiner mentality that has a tendency to push people towards viewing Bitcoin as an investment vehicle and store of value only, rather than saying, "Well, I bought a cup of coffee with, 5,200 satoshis today." So
Nice.
I hope that answers that question, Bing Bong. That was on the fly. Maybe we can edit it in post if it didn't sound good.
Yeah.
I don't know. So what else do we have?
Well, I'm looking back through not only the list that's compiled, but some of the other questions, and we have several people asking to know. They want to know more about Trig. They all assume Trig is a he, and they want to know what you know about this person called Trig.
Okay. Well, this is a difficult one, and
also recognizing that Trig is an enigma because Trig chooses to be an enigma. So there's a level of privacy, which we're very privacy friendly, right? So
it's true. Well, let's tackle this question head on, and we elaborate more on Trig. Sure. If you don't know, Trig is a master programmer, and being a very good programmer myself, I can tell you that I am perpetually in the shadow of Trig. He is the person that I go to when I think I've done my best and I've produced 50 lines of code, and he turns it into 10. It's really quite infuriating. But aside from that, I've known Trig since I was 15 years old.
Wow.
Like we've been really good friends for a really long time. I mean, that's 25 years. We have been programming together for probably 23 of those years on various projects. And he is by far the best C programmer I've ever met, by a margin that makes the second best not even close. So there's that. All right, so I'll tell you that about Trig. Secondly, he's intensely private. He doesn't want publicity. He doesn't want to be publicly associated with anything. It's not Mochimo specific. He is a private individual who has created massive troves of digital IP out there in terms of video and graphics editing tools that are public domain, that are used to teach classes around the world. And this is a thing that he does as his hobby, if you will. Mm-hmm. So Mochimo is my passion project and my design, and I have been very fortunate to have a master programmer to consult with along the way in the development and creation of this. However, he's been very adamant in being able to maintain his anonymity. So that's about the most that I can say about it. He's a real person. Terry has met him multiple times.
I would add that he has a monk-like aesthetic.
He is, yes.
And
absolutely.
that he is, if you can imagine someone who lives a very simple, basic, almost surprisingly technology-free life, while still being a wizard with computers, it's an interesting balance. He's an exceptional human being in a lot of ways, but privacy is the number one.
Yeah, if you Google the word ascetic, ASCETIC,
yes,
you will find a picture of Trig. He really, when we say a monk-like, that's accurate both in the sense that he's Buddhist. Oh, I'll share that detail. I'm sure he wouldn't be too angry. But also he lives a very Spartan existence. And every computer that he's had for the last 25 years, he's gotten secondhand from me. And in fact, he did most of his programming on an IBM XT up until about 10 years ago. And in case you don't know, the IBM XT came out in 1983. so that's all I'm going to say about Trig. I hope that's enough. It's going to have to be.
So let's see here. I'm just looking through the questions. We've got about 11 minutes to go.
Oh, there's an add-on question. How did Trig feel about moving away from his algo? He did not care in the slightest.
He's like, whatever.
He basically wrote that when we were sitting at a Starbucks for like 30 minutes.
Yeah.
He literally, when I say he wrote it, I want you to picture a guy taking out a sheet of blank paper and writing C code on it. That was the original creation of Trigg's algorithm, and it took about 30 minutes. So he just really couldn't care. I mean, to him, that was a cup of coffee.
Yeah, exactly.
So, what other questions do we have?
Well, let's see here. Well,
this is how will the upcoming 2.5 privacy layer work?
Okay, so
I like that question. That's an easy one.
All right, let's talk about that. How will it work? It'll work great.
It'll work great.
Next question.
I don't know if it will work because here's what we're going to do, guys. I'm going to present the code to the community. I'm going to say, hey, do you want to incorporate this? And see what people say. We have a large number of miners on the network now. Each one of them is going to have to look at what we're talking about and say, yes, I think that's a great idea. If I don't get a unanimous, yes, that's a great idea, I'm going to put the code up on the GitHub as a little side deal and just leave it there for future generations to mull over. So there's that. That being said, I have gotten near unanimous support for the idea of a privacy layer. And so that's why I created it. And how it will work is subject to implementations that I will not provide. In other words, we're going to build the logic into the system and let people produce their own clients for the privacy layer. And I know that sounds like I'm dodging the question, and I am sort of, because we will enable the capability, but it's only if people have a need for it that they will begin to deploy the actual privacy layer, which is utterly optional. And to break it down to you so that you can understand the process, essentially, you will sacrifice coins in your own Watts address or tagged address to create a certificate that will exist on the blockchain. And that certificate is 1/2 of a key pair. You will be doing so as part of an aggregated transaction that's mediated by the blockchain. Each node will have a set of rules for how they evaluate the contracts around those transactions. But what it boils down to is via some mechanism, which I do not control and do not envision how you might implement it, people will come together to craft multi-user transactions where everybody sacrifices a fixed number of coins at the same moment to create a large quantity of certificates as part of a single transaction. And as you do that, you will be providing your addresses upon which the certificates will be based, but there won't be a direct one-for-one binding between you and those certificates. So imagine 100 people each put in 5 Mochimo into a bag. Okay. When they put those 5 Mochimo in, they're also submitting 5 public addresses. All right. Nobody knows, except for the people that are involved in the creation of that transaction, whose public addresses belong to which source address. Okay. And the actual transaction that's submitted on the network is ordered high to low according to address. And so the transaction that hits the network is pushed via an overlay network or a third-party client that gathered those people together and created the contract, that it received coins, that everybody was able to sign the same transaction. Okay, that's the secret sauce to this, is that all 100 players receive the entire transaction with all 500 addresses as the output, and everybody signs that same transaction with their input 5 Mochimo address. So consequently, what ends up happening is we put 100 signatures in, we get 500 certificates out, and nobody knows who they belong to. And that process can be automated such that the input to that system is other certificates, meaning that you can take your certificates and dump them into the next transaction and the next and the next, so that there is no way to compare the creation of the certificate to which of the addresses actually owned the coins to begin with. It's sort of an on-chain cyclic abstraction layer.
Gotcha.
That's how it works. I know that sounds a little bit complicated. we're not going to create a client to do the second layer crafting of those contracts. We are going to build in the capability to process those contracts to the blockchain. And if it ever comes about that people feel a need to use that technology, they have it available to them, and somebody will have to create the engine that produces those agreements.
Gotcha.
I hope that explains it. That might be a little complicated, but the bottom line is what you end up with is a pure privacy layer, because you can then later take that certificate, which is now a bearer instrument, and provide it to anybody with the private key associated with it, and they can redeem it for that input Mochimo. It's so Mochiman says it's kind of like a Tor VPN. That's exactly right. We've got inputs and outputs, but you can't connect the two. So that is very much a good analogy. So I think it's superior to ring signatures, which have some vulnerabilities. I think it's simpler, and I think it's what we've continued to do in the entire course of this project, which is to innovate on-chain solutions for things that other people didn't think you could solve.
So Chris actually has a question. He says, if there's time, Mochimo wallet app.
I think he's referring to a mobile wallet app.
Yes.
So there is a mobile wallet design that's been completed. It's gorgeous, actually. I really can't wait to see it in production. We are, I think, for third-party apps right now, we're looking at the Ledger Nano. Though I think that's up higher on the list of priorities, and we've got a third party that's actually working on integration of a hard wallet, or hard,
physical wallet.
Yeah, a physical wallet. So that I think is ahead of the list, but right behind that, from my personal preference, would be development of the mobile wallet.
Yeah, and I mean, so we do have a layout that's been done that is quite beautiful for a mobile design. And on top of that, Mojo itself is written in Java, right? It's a mix of Java and C, and Java lends itself well to moving to a mobile platform. So it's only a matter of time.
I think that's a fair statement. I want to say, Ortis has said a few times that the Java version of Mojo could be adapted to a mobile format relatively easily, but that's not a thing that we want to do lightly.
No.
We say that somebody has produced the layout. That's the front end. In other words, the front end of the mobile wallet is done, and how the logic of everything connects together, how you navigate and use the wallet, all of that's already envisioned and created, again, by a community member.
Yeah.
We just haven't had time to connect the back end logic, and we want to be very deliberate about that, probably to find the right resource in the community that has experience building those exact things, and to work with that person to connect a back end to the front end. And that's just a matter of finding a community member that wants to do it.
Yeah. So if you're on the call or you're listening to this later and you have a burning desire to help us with that, send us a direct message, because we'd like to talk to you.
This is the sort of thing that will result in a fantastic bounty.
Yes.
Like when this Ledger Nano thing hits the system, it'll be a community member that created it from start to finish. They came to us and said, "Hey, I want to do something. I have this skill set." I said, "Well, what do you think about digging into this and making this happen?" And they said, "Yeah, I can work on that." So it's being worked on right now. And when that hits the community and people are able to use a Ledger Nano X to use Mochimo, then that person's going to receive a fat bounty, because that's how we do things.
Nice. So we've got about a minute left to go. I've got a couple other questions I could throw at you without any warning, or I could let you wrap it up. It's up to you.
Wow, we got a minute. Throw one at me. What do you got?
So, GitHub. We were moving away from GitHub. Where are we at with that? And why?
For those of you who don't know, GitHub was acquired by Microsoft last year, and Microsoft has a habit of doing things that I don't necessarily agree with. I can tell you that there is what we consider a main repository for Mochimo, that happens to be my original GitHub account for Mochimo. It's not the only one. Certainly there are dozens of forks and other third-party repositories, but the one that we try to unify all of the code that other people produce and that we produce in-house into a single cohesive release version has been to date on GitHub. The thing that happened that instigated a move away from GitHub is that the Microsoft-owned GitHub suddenly, and by suddenly I mean with no warning whatsoever, shut down all access to its services that were paid and hosted worldwide to those people who are in countries that the U.S. has some kind of embargo or other trade issue with.
So like a Zimbabwe or North Korea or
Iran, all
Iran,
these, all of these players suddenly found themselves basically with the rug pulled out from under them with no warning whatsoever. And I take issue with that business practice just because of how damaging I know that to be, both to the open source community and to people who have nothing to do with the partisan politics or geopolitical situation that resulted in those sorts of embargoes, and furthermore had every confidence to believe that they would be fine on the GitHub ecosystem up until through profit motivation only they sold to Microsoft, essentially selling out those people who were the people that were responsible for the success, in other words, the programmers and contributors. So the issue that I have is that they did so without notification and without providing a pathway to retaining the IP and the functionality that those people had depended on GitHub for. And for that reason, we decided to move away from that platform. And by we, I mean just me. Like I'm moving my repository to GitLab for now, for that reason, because I do not want to give my money to a company that will do that to people without warning.
Gotcha. All right.
Does that answer the question?
It does. It does.
Okay.
The other thing, since we're talking about GitHub, GitLab, there's some code that we put out there that we produced the last release that was pretty unique. Ortis did. I believe you might have worked on that as well. You want to talk a little bit about that code and why we're giving that out to the world? And
sure. When we first built the Mochimo system, every single line of code in Mochimo was built from scratch with one critical exception, which was called out in the code, and that was the SHA-256 algorithm that we used that was part of the public domain and published by Brad Conti. Okay, we are very grateful to Brad for producing that work and for putting it in the public domain, in part so that we didn't have to recreate it. Like, well, we sort of did recreate it, honestly, to make it fit on a 32-bit system. It was a re-implementation, but we were able to base it on his work for that algorithm. As a thank you to Brad and people like Brad, we are releasing all 8 of the hashing algorithms that comprise the night hash algo to the public under public domain, meaning that all of those hashing algorithms, which are produced in some cases for the first time, of which I'm aware, on a CUDA system, a GPU system, we're going to release those as reference implementations for others to take and use for any future project that they want. You know, if you need to do crypto hashing on a GPU, you're going to have our reference implementations to use as public domain. And we're just doing that as a nod to Brad and his fine work, and also to give back to the programming community, and so that we can benefit in the way that they can benefit in the way that we benefited from Brad's work. That's nice. The reason for that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I want to make sure we got that out there, because sometimes those things, we try to do a lot of cool things, and sometimes we're good about doing stuff and maybe not good about always letting everybody know that we're doing these good things,
right? Doing
these cool things. So, well, that's about all the time we have.
Yeah, stick around, everybody. We're going to do a little bit of little celebratory Mochimo riddling and trivia. So for those of you who don't know, whenever we do trivia, there are bounties associated with positively responding to the trivia questions, to answering them correctly. So we're going to be doing that here shortly. By shortly, I mean it's 9:04 Eastern Daylight Time right now. We're going to kick that off. 56 minutes, right at 10 o'clock, with some Mochimo trivia and giveaways. So thank you so much for listening, everybody. As always, we are so proud to be a part of this project. We know that it is the community and the people who are participating in this community that make us what we are. We cannot succeed without you. And we're just so grateful to be on this journey with you guys together.